This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with Kate Gray, a former Paralympian and now turned broadcaster. She discusses her pathway to becoming an Olympic athlete, as well as Beijing 2008 and London 2012. I hope you enjoy. Kate, thank you very much for coming. First of all, I know you're very, very busy. As always.
You know, I've always got time to come here and see you, Mike.
Yeah, she is. And how are things in general?
Yeah, really good. It's busy at the moment. It's that time of year where you're kind of like catching up on everything that's happened over the course of the year. I've done quite a lot of travelling recently, which is obviously exciting, but it does mean you have to come back and catch up on the day-to-day jobs. But yeah, otherwise, and I'm always very excited to be back here at the University of Bath because my old stomping ground, and it's where kind of things began for me, really.
Have you been able to see anyone yet? Or
no, actually. I mean, when you walk through, you do kind of see who's been updated in the Hall of Fame, or you kind of see there's always someone in the staff that I still recognise, and they're like, "What are you doing back here?" And I'm like, "Oh, you know, just doing a bit, helping everybody out." Because I was actually here for the netball at the weekend. There was a big netball event going on, so I help out with that as well because I'm a big netball fan as well.
Yeah, I tried to stay clear of the uni then. It was going to be busy. I was like, just get me away from that.
Whenever there's a big match on, you're like, actually, this is one I don't want to be. Same with the Christmas markets in Bath. Yeah, stay clear.
Yeah, I went there in the evening this year, which was relatively good decision because most people had left by then, but trying to go there midday is horrendous.
No, not good.
So I guess the main reason I wanted to speak to you and kind of your background is your swimming background. So for those people who kind of don't know who you are, haven't heard you before, just to explain kind of your swimming background, what got you into it, why you started on that journey and where you ended up, etc. Yeah,
so I'm a former Paralympic swimmer. I have retired now, and I always have to say that because otherwise people are like, "Oh, you're still training?" No, definitely not. I represented Great Britain for 10 years, sort of competing from the age of 13 to 23, competed at Paralympic Games, World Championships, European Championships. I guess I could say I had a bit of a roller coaster of a career. I had brilliant highs, competing for your country at the Paralympic Games, but also some real disappointments as well, as things didn't quite go to plan always, as sport throws lots of curveballs in. But also my career came to a bit of an abrupt end when I sort of struggled with my health in the back end of my career, and was hoping to go to London 2012, but glandular fever and overtraining just meant that actually it wasn't meant to be. But luckily that then led me into a different career, which I guess I could take credit for all the stuff I did within my swimming life that helped me get into other career options. So yeah, it was a lot of my time was spent here at the University of Bath, and a lot of hours spent in the swimming pool, 5 o'clock get-ups and 5 to 6 hours a day in the pool, in the gym. But I mean, that's what you've got to do, really, isn't it? It's what it takes to be the best. And I guess I can look back on my career and say I have no regrets, because I definitely believe that everything happened for a reason, and it sort of provided me with new opportunities.
Okay, so obviously briefly touched on your training in terms of training times and stuff. Can you talk us through what like a regular day for you would be in terms of your training and what that incorporated?
Yeah, well, I guess I had like two halves to my sort of career as a swimmer, because I got into the British swimming programme quite early on. So at 13 years old, you know, suddenly I was being chosen to be a part of the British swimming team, and I was swimming every day at that point, but only like a couple of hours a day. And actually it was quite manageable, and I had other sports that I was enjoying as well. So suddenly British swimming saying, "You're going to be a Paralympian very soon, and we want to offer you all the support and training that you need. And this is what you need to do." And suddenly I went from sort of training every day to twice a day, before and after school, fitting in gym and strength and conditioning sessions, which was completely alien to me at sort of 13, 14 years old, and had to be quite sure of what I was doing and how I was going to do it, because I think at a young age you kind of get handed this booklet of how to be a great athlete and you're expected to just do it. Whereas my parents were always very aware that you always need to have a backup plan. You need to focus on your studies as well. So I did follow what they sort of suggested to me, and I did build up to that, but it had to be built up. I couldn't just suddenly stop everything and just become a full-time swimmer. I had to get everything in order to be able to do that. And I think it was around about 2005, we got the bid to host the London 2012 Games. And that became quite clear to me that actually it was everything towards my swimming career. You know, if I was going to get to the games in 7 years' time, every decision that I made had to be about my swimming. And I was just about going into my sixth form year, so sort of around about 16 years old. And that meant I was at that point that I knew I wasn't worried about my other sports. I knew I wasn't worried about kind of other commitments in life. I could do my swimming and I could do my studies. And so that's when I started working at what university I wanted to go to, what could provide me with the facilities, the education, but also the support. And that's why I ended up coming to the University of Bath. And it went from, I think I must have been doing probably about 18 hours a week in my home program, sort of towards the end of my time at school and at home, and then got to here and it sort of bumped up to 25 to 30. So that's twice a day, 5 days a week, and that's sort of five hours in the pool, an hour in the gym, and that's pretty much how it went week in, week out. We got Sundays off though, and that was always important. And then obviously fitting in my studies around that. But you know, I was lucky that I was living on campus. I could just cycle into the pool, do my training, grab some breakfast, walk across to the uni, do my studies, fit in all of that around it, and still see my friends as well. Like I always was very aware that I couldn't just be a swimmer. I couldn't just spend all my time with swimmers. I had to be around people that also provided me with just general day-to-day life chat. So I think that, you know, everything that I was offered as an athlete, I bought into and tried to follow. It's just, there are lots of distractions around, particularly when you're starting university and you've got Freshers Week going on. And as you're going training at 5 o'clock in the morning, your mates are coming in from the nightclub. And when they're eating and drinking all sorts, you're trying to stay quite disciplined. So I learned a lot about myself. But ultimately I had a big goal at the end of it. Always had 2012 at the end of the road. And therefore, every decision I made, I had to go, well, is that going to help me get to London 2012? And so that definitely helped me understand that what I was doing was commitment rather than sacrifice. And getting up at 5 o'clock every morning does require a lot of commitment.
I'm not an early riser.
The swimmers are the tough ones.
Yeah.
We were always, you know, when I'm here at the University of Bath and Sports Training Village, we've done 3 hours worth of training before I see the athletics people walking in at 10 o'clock. And we're there going, we've just done 3 hours, 2 hours in the pool, an hour in the gym, and you're yawning walking in at 10 o'clock. Not okay.
Yeah, I'm not an early riser, so for me, those 5 o'clock starts have been tough. So it's quite interesting how you're saying about you were able to play other sports up until probably sixth form. Yeah. So would British swimming and English swimming have wanted you to specialise early, or were they kind of happy for you to flicker between the two?
They would ideally have liked me to specialise. I mean, my defence was, I'm still young. I'm still developing, and assuming I'm still improving, why would you tell me to stop doing the things that actually are working quite nicely as cross training? So I played netball. I also did all my sports clubs at school. So all of them were feeding into my endurance, my stamina, my sort of general skills that I need as an athlete. But it got tricky when it was like injury worries. So like, for example, I twisted my ankle while trying to do high jump training in athletics. And that then affected how much training I could do with my swimming. And then in netball, you know, you fall over and you take a bit of a bruising and you don't feel great for a week. So when I started to realise that actually my swimming was being affected rather than helped, so it was hindering rather than helping my swimming performance, I had to take a break. And also, as your work commitments, your studies commitments, your social commitments, they all increase as you get older, and you have to start prioritising. And actually I realised I need to prioritise my swimming and my studies. And also my parents couldn't tax me around doing everything. I've got 2 other siblings as well. Like I remember, like on a week, I'd be doing sort of a couple of mornings a week, and then I would be doing school clubs. From my school clubs, I would then go swimming training, and then from swimming training, I'd go to athletics training. But I loved it. And I think always throughout that time as a sort of a child and a young person, it was me driving it. I was never being taken to training because my parents wanted me to go. I was going to training because I wanted to go. And if I was going morning training, I had to knock on my parents' door and say, it's time to go. Can you get up, please? And they're farmers. They know how to get up early. Yeah. But getting up at 5:30 was not something they were going to do unless I was pushing them to do it. So I've always driven my career. And therefore, when I got to university and I don't have mum and dad around me to take me training, I was already sort of in that mindset of, well, this is my goal, this is my dream, I know what to do.
So were you always sporty from like a real young age? So
yeah.
it's something that always interested you and you kind of just
yeah.
ran with that?
Well, so I have one hand, so I'm a left-hand amputee below the elbow. So I lost my arm when I was 2, and sport was the thing that helped me to show people what I was capable of. Because having a physical disability 20 odd years ago wasn't particularly good. I mean, it's never really good to go chop your hand off, is it? But it wasn't good in the fact that I grew up in a farming family where being physically strong was an asset. And so suddenly I've become disabled and I wasn't able to do all the things that my family could do, my friends could do. And so I constantly used sport as a way to show people what was possible. And I loved that feeling of going, look, I've learned to catch, I've learned to skip, I've learned to climb a climbing frame. All of those things that people originally thought I couldn't do, sport allowed me to show them that I could. So I think I was just massively driven in sport because it made me feel good and it made me feel confident. Never was I like, oh, one day I'm going to be a Paralympian, because I didn't even know there was Paralympics. I loved watching the Olympics. I loved watching sport. Didn't ever think I was going to be a Paralympian, and I didn't ever think I was going to be a swimmer, because swimming was probably one of my worst sports as a child. Like, I hated it as a child. I could barely swim, usually swam around in circles, couldn't keep up with any of my friends. And it was one of the few sports that I felt disabled when I did it, whereas most of the other things, I can run as fast as my friends. I could learn to catch and get quite good at team sports quite quickly, whereas swimming was the sport I always felt disadvantaged with. So I didn't realise there was a Paralympics out there that I could attend, so I just focused on sort of the sports that I was good at. And then it wasn't until I went to my first disability competition, I think I was about 10 or 11, that I was like, oh, I'm quite good at swimming for someone with one hand. Oh, right, okay. And, oh, look, there's pathways I can follow and people that can support me. And so from there it snowballed quite quickly, but never did I let off the fact that my other sports were also really good for me and I will do them for as long as I can. Yes.
So one thing that struck me with you when we first met and our subsequent, obviously, interactions, known each other probably,
it's about 10, yeah, well, it was like 10 years since I was at uni. So yeah, it must have been sort of 7 or 8 years.
Would have been around there. Is your humour towards the fact that obviously you have a disability and stuff, to me, like, it makes me want to burst out laughing every time you tell a story or you play a little anecdote, and something that you obviously done previously in terms of telling jokes. Do you mind explaining to people what actually happened to your arm? Not because it's a humorous story, just because I think
it's part of it, yeah. I've already alluded to the fact that I chopped my hand off. So I chopped my left hand off in a sausage machine when I was 2 years old. I grew up on a farm, lots of dangerous equipment around me. I was a terrible 2-year-old, didn't listen to my parents, and as a result, I got myself into a very dangerous situation, which resulted in my left hand being chopped off. Completely my fault. Changed my life forever on that day. I do believe it changed my life in a strange way for the better, because it's forced me to kind of find new depths to my character, become a lot more resilient, to face challenge sort of with open mind rather than I can't do things, because everyone sort of assumes you can't do things. And so therefore I have to prove them wrong all the time. And I quite like that. That's sort of where my competitive and very determined personalities come through. Whether I would have been like that if I had 2 hands, I don't know. I do believe I still would have been in sport for sure. Whether I would have got to the levels that I've got to, and whether I'd be doing sort of the career that I have now, I don't know. And so that's why I kind of look back on that day and think, okay, it was a horrendous time for my family and for my parents, but I do believe it's turned me into a better person. And I make a joke out of it because people hear the story and they just think, oh my God, that's the worst thing in the world. Like, how do you not break down into tears? And I think, well, because it's done me good. Like, I've done something positive with it. Like, I'm not wallowing at home. I could have been that child at the back of the class, upset and insecure about the fact that I was different, but I wasn't. I was that child that embraced it and used it to my advantage. So humour is an element of that helps people go, okay, if she's laughing at herself and finding it funny, maybe we should feel fine about being around her as well.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing for me is it made me laugh from the first time that we met. I remember you telling me stories that you'd be in the gym and you'd have like your fake arm on and stuff, and then you'd be on the run machine and just for a laugh you'd like let your arm fling off and watch everyone's reactions around you.
I leave it places to like guard my piece of equipment, because when you're in the gym and it's really competitive and there's all these students and sports people around, I put my arm on the equipment so they know that that's mine and they don't go near it, or it suddenly pops off and everyone's like, oh my God, it's like fallen off. And it's just part of who I am. And if it means that I'm remembered for weird and wonderful things, then I really don't mind.
I think the interesting thing listening to you there is you saying that you got quite a lot of gratification as a child from proving people wrong by saying, oh, you can't climb a climbing frame, you can't do this, and you go, well, actually I can do that, look, I'm fine. And I think that's really interesting that the sport you ended up succeeding in, if you like, or doing really well in, was something that initially you were like, I'm really struggling with this. And I don't know if there's any crossover to you when you get a bit older actually going, well, I think that I can't do this. At the minute I feel like I'm struggling, but actually I can do it. If I set my mind to it, that's something I can do, and I want that gratification of if I set my mind to it, I'm going to be able to achieve this.
I have always been that person. If someone tells me I can't do something, then I have to try and do everything I can to prove them that they're wrong. And if something is a challenge, probably more so as a child, less so as an adult now, because we get lazy and we kind of sort of move on with life, not being that sort of crazy, annoying child that's like, I can do it, so I'm going to do it. And I still got that within me, but I definitely was more like that as a child. I mean, the job opportunities that I'm in now, you probably would say, well, you are, you're doing things that actually are really challenging and are difficult. You stand up in front of hundreds of people, thousands of people, and you talk, and most people would think that's scary. But for me, it's become the norm. So what I think would have been an absolute crazy thing to do as a child, to me now is just part of my day-to-day life. So it has built in me that mindset of, right, this is going to be tough, but it'll be worth it all in the end. And I think to have that attitude as a young person will serve you so well as you get older, because especially in this day and age, like, children are faced with so much drama and stress and anxiety just through the world that they're growing up in, whether it's social media, whether it's the pressures of being a young person, that if you can have the right attitude of going, right, okay, that's happened, it's fine, I'm not going to let it get me down, I'm going to move forward with this and turn it into something positive. It's easier said than done, but it will massively help you out. And I work a lot with children, and it does make me sad that a lot of them are just like, no, it's too hard, I don't want to do it. And they have a fear of failure. And they don't know how to fail. And I think my biggest lessons in life were the times when I failed. Because I failed at everything as a child before I did well at them. I dropped a ball over and over again until I learned to catch it. I fell on my face trying to do a handstand over and over again until I learned to do it with one hand. And I didn't care that I failed, because I learned from that failure and moved on. I just don't think children are allowed to fail these days. And if they are, they're horrified at the result of what might happen if they do, and therefore they're never really building up that resilience, and that's a really hard thing for them to then have to deal with when they're old, because we have to deal with it day to day as you get older, regardless. I think the resilience thing is really important, because, like, to a degree we do try and wrap them up in cotton wool, and if you look at younger kids, they have to deal with SATs and all that type of stuff. So for them, they have a lot of stress going on SATs. And they think, oh, if I don't do one of my SATs, that's the end of the world. And when actually, you got secondary school, you got GCSEs. If you don't do well in your GCSEs, okay, not great. There's other options.
There's other options. It might be A-levels. It might go and do something vocational. You don't do well there, okay, you might be able to go and get a degree somewhere. You might be able to go into a career and work your way up there. But I feel like a lot of the time people put so much pressure on that thing as if you don't pass now, that means you never can. Which isn't the case. No. And I think sometimes you look at an academic sense, it looks like that. But we also do it in a society thing of kids not being allowed to run around at playtimes. Or
they might hurt themselves. Because they're going to get into trouble.
I've got a coach at Southampton, a friend of mine, Andy Eisenstruck. He must be 60 odd now. I don't want to do him a disservice. Apologies.
I hope you went on the lower side of that guess.
I think he's 60 odd. But he says he wants to see kids climbing trees and all that type of stuff, because then you learn. So if I'm running around a playground or climbing a tree and I fall and I hurt myself, I learn, well, next time either climb it properly or run around better so I don't fall and hurt myself. You
need to understand risk. Like, I learned risk quite early on, well, clearly, because I chopped my own arm off. But, I learned limits, and I learned how to go again when things don't go well, or when you bounce back, when you reach rock bottom. Whereas you say, kids are either too afraid to fail, or they're not allowed to fail because, you know, they're being overprotected. And it's just sad, because then they haven't got that base at the time when they're probably most resilient. Kids are more resilient than anybody else if you give them the opportunity to learn from it. And that's what I do a lot when I do work in schools, is, you know, setting them challenges that are probably at times they will fail, but then they learn, and they learn to move forward and get better.
And I think probably you realise this more as an adult, but everyone has stuff going on in their life, and kids will as well, that you probably aren't aware of.
Yeah.
And it's just encouraging them to come out the other end of something. It might be mum and dad are fighting, or it might be death of a grandparent, death of a pet, something like that, and go, it's hard at the minute. It's going to be hard going through that scenario, but actually you'll get through the other end and you'll be fine. And
you'll look back and think, that was really tough, but I'm stronger as a result of it. Yeah.
This is interesting. So obviously you mentioned that you had some highs in your career and you're low in your career. Do you want to talk through some of the highs and kind of where that took you and all that type of stuff?
I mean, in sport, obviously the highs naturally fall around the time when you win.
Yeah.
Or when you make a team, or when you go to your first Paralympics. So I'd be foolish to ignore the fact that I went to Beijing 2008 Paralympic Games, which I would say was probably a little bit unexpected, because I'd only just started here at the University of Bath for a few months, and I was in totally different environment to what I'd been at home. I was with different people, different training squad, different coach. So I was taking a bit of a risk of being a new setup and having to qualify for Paralympic Games. So I didn't really have any pressure on me, to be honest. I was like, well, if I go, great, it's a bonus. I can learn about how the Paralympics work ready for London. Or if I don't, I can just refocus and get really settled into my new training program. I did qualify, which was brilliant, and got to go out to the Beijing Paralympics. And we always say London was the one that made the games. I mean, I had an amazing experience out in Beijing, like whether it's sort of the holding camp that you go to before, and you got to kind of experience being in a team environment. And then we got to the athletes village, which is just this massive city of just athletes from all over the world, and a 24-hour food hall the size of 2 football pitches, which has got McDonald's in it as well, which we spent most of our time avoiding, of course, because we're athletes. But just this whole world of like, wow, this is it. This is as good as it gets. And then, you know, being introduced out onto poolside for my first event in front of 15,000 people. You know, I hadn't competed in front of more than 50 people, you know, in my usual home environment. So suddenly there's 15,000 people, and amongst them were my family. You know, they'd come out to watch and support me. And I remember lining up for my race. It was the 100 meters breaststroke. I was in the outside lane of the heats, which suggests you're one of the slowest there. If you're in the middle lane, you've got more of a chance, but I had no pressure. I just dived in. Can't remember anything that happened other than it felt really, really great. Touched the wall, looked at the scoreboard to see what time I'd gone. And all I could see was my face on the scoreboard. They'd like done a close-up of me, which was not a good look. So sort of panting, red face. Then the times flashed up, and it turns out I'd won my heat. I'd qualified second into the final, and I'd done a 4-second personal best. Where did that come from? Like, just an example of how suddenly you get to a major event and you step up and you think, well, I've got nothing to lose. Let's go for it. And I did. And still remember that moment of getting out the pool and looking up to the stands and seeing my family who was so proud, and then going through the media zone and Claire Balding not knowing who I was but wanting to find out more. And I had this sort of moment of like, this is what it's all about. But unfortunately, in Beijing, I was physically at my best. I definitely had done the training and I was ready to take on the world physically, but I hadn't anticipated the pressure and the anxiety I was going to feel as a result of being a favourite. So I'd gone from being an underdog, no one expected me to make a final, to suddenly being one of the favourites to win a medal. And I totally psyched myself out. I lost all sort of confidence in my ability. I was worried about my competition. I thought they must have been taking it easy because it was the heats, and maybe I'd given it all in the first race, and just talked myself out of winning. And didn't eat properly, couldn't rest properly, didn't hydrate enough, and came back for the final in the evening, a total stressed out athlete that didn't take the opportunity, you know, considering how I was 8-10 hours earlier, which was this no pressure underdog, to suddenly being a favourite that couldn't cope. And As a result, I didn't swim faster in the final. I only went half a second slower, but half a second was the difference between silver and fifth. And I finished fifth. And that was a massive lesson for me, because I'd gone from the most amazing moment of my career of making it through to Paralympic final and doing an amazing time and everything coming together, to suddenly falling apart as a result of something I hadn't prepared for, which was my mental toughness, dealing with pressure. And I think that's now what we're very good at understanding. You know, every athlete out there's got a psychologist or someone to support them, you know, mentally. I just hadn't really understood that. So as bittersweet as Beijing was, missing out on a medal by such small margins, I learned a lot about myself. So I went back to training and didn't just focus on how I was going to physically train my body. I focused on mentally training my head as well, and went to the World Championships the following year and got a silver and bronze medal out in Brazil, and graduated from university, which, while trying to train full time, was horrendous. But again, mentally, I handled that pressure a lot better than I probably would have done, you know, a good few years before. And then it was about building up towards London. 2 years, decided to go full-time training, staying here at the University of Bath. I was in the best place to just fully focus my attention on my training. And in 2011, I think I went to #1 in the world in 3 of my events. I was pretty much setting myself up to be the one to beat in London 2012, and just swam some absolutely amazing times, and just felt like, wow, this is it. I've done a year of full-time training and this is the result I'm getting. Amazing. 1 more year to go. Unfortunately, I think what I'd done is I'd trained my mind so mentally tough that I ended up not listening to my body at times. And you become so tough that you think, I've just got a cold, it's fine, I'll train through it. It's weak if you don't train. Or, you know, I bet everybody else is training, so you should probably be training as well. To the point where I got coughs and colds that didn't really go away. Then I got tonsillitis and sinusitis, and kind of avoided going to the doctor because I just sort of knew that they were going to say, you need to take a break, you need to take some time off. And it was the year of the games. I wasn't going to take time off, and just really lost my way a little, because I think I'd become so focused on the end goal and was so driven and mentally strong that I was going to get there, that I stopped listening to my body, which was ultimately deteriorating. And it ended up with me having to go to the doctors because I'd collapsed in training and was just absolutely broken and wasn't hitting any of my training goals, was barely even turning up to training if I was there because I could barely get in the pool. And it turns out I had glandular fever, and I'd spent the last 3 to 6 months of my training through glandular fever, which is the worst thing to do because you should really take a break and you should rest. There's no sort of medication, there's no cure other than you just take a break. And I was so tunnel visioned and blinkered by the fact that, well, the trials for London is 2 months away. Like, why would I stop? Maybe the last 10 years is going to hold it together for me. All I want to do is go to London. That's all I wanted to do. So I kept training, and, you know, I think at times my coach dragged me out of the pool and told me to go home and said, you're not supposed to be here, get out of here. And I was like, no, I've got to at least try. I can't come this far. And ultimately, it didn't work out for me, and I went to the trials for London 2012 and I missed out on qualifying by half a second, which, click your fingers, that's all it is. But when I realised what I was doing the year before, when I was #1 in the world, I deteriorated massively. And it was only at that point when I sort of thought, wow, what have I become? You know, I looked at myself and I wasn't well at all, but I didn't care because I just wanted to make sure I was doing everything I could to go to London. Whereas ultimately that was the reason why I didn't go to London, because I burnt myself out. And that was the lowest point. You know, you win amazing medals and those highs are incredible, but the lows you learn more from. And I remember kind of that realization of driving home and being like, my God, what am I going to do with my life now? All I've ever known is being a swimmer. What do I do next?
It's interesting. Obviously, the common theme coming out is that very resilient in terms of personality, kid growing up. And that's almost worked to a detriment to you. Yeah, it is. So resilient of being going, actually, no, it's fine. I'm aching, it's fine.
It's fine.
I'll get through it.
You just toughen up. Yeah. And ultimately that can be athletes' biggest enemy, is that you're constantly fighting with this resilience within you that you've built up to get to that level. But then when you get to a certain age, you've done a certain amount of training, you know, your body does become tired, and swimmers don't necessarily get injury problems. They get health problems because you're in a cold pool 5 hours of the day. Your hair is wet on wet, miserable days like it is today. And you're walking around with wet hair because you don't have time to dry it because you've got to get to lectures. And then you've been up since 5 and then you're back in the pool in the next few hours. And, you know, your energy levels are always up and down. And I know for sure, particularly because I have friends that are still athletes, the understanding around maintaining athletes' energy levels is become much more better understood. So it's not just you have 3 meals a day. It's completely personalized to who they are and what they are. And, you know, I went through phases of anemia when I was swimming. I had all sorts of problems with my menstrual cycles. I would say at times, sorry, hitting the microphone, at times I probably had a mild eating disorder because when you're a swimmer, you're constantly looking at your body and you're constantly aware that, oh, I've put on a bit of weight. Oh, well, I won't have breakfast this morning because I've got a weigh-in next week and I've got to be aware of, you know, not overeating, or I've got skin folds. Worst invention ever. I mean, how demoralizing is that for a female to have their skin felt and prodded and pulled to see what percentage of body fat they have? And I think that played a role in what eventually ended up me being burnt out, because I struggled to really find a constant, this is me at my best. You know, this is my body at its strongest, because you're constantly thinking, could I be leaner? Could I be stronger? Could I be faster? And there's always the new science. There's the new kid on the block that's like, oh, this is the new diet you should follow. This is the new regime you should do. And I see athletes struggling with this all the time. And I don't get involved in it too much now, because I think for me, it's quite close to home in kind of what might have ultimately been the finishing of my career. And I don't want to get that bogged down with it, because I look back on my career and I'm very proud of what I've achieved. And I take the positives from that and I use that to my advantage. But I know there's a lot of science around why athletes don't make it, you know, to where they believe they can, because of illness, burnout, health problems. And I think a lot of that does come down to this constant changing environment that we're in, which is, this is the latest diet you should follow. This is what you should eat, what you shouldn't eat. This is the new training you should do, you shouldn't do. And a new coach comes in and, you know, brings something different again, and your body never really knows what's best. It's
interesting because obviously there's a common thing, the Michael Phelps, which is out everywhere, and it's 10,000 calories per day meal and all that type of stuff. It seems like the majority of people probably the other end, where they're trying to watch what they eat and how much they eat and all that type of stuff.
It's so individual. So individual. Like I lived with guys who could not eat enough calories. Like they were an example of Michael Phelps, because in swimming, I think this is very much my made up theory, but men are much more dense in the water. They've got more muscle. So they're dense in the water. So therefore, just to keep themselves afloat, they are having to work really hard. Women have got quite useful flotation devices. You know, they carry a little bit more fat. You know, they have breasts and bottoms that allow them just to float that little bit better. I definitely did. And so we don't need as many calories, because we're not burning them off just to stay afloat. We just need them to get us from one end of the pool to the other. So I'd be there trying to, you know, stay on my quite regimented diet, and I'm with guys that cannot eat enough calories, that they get through a stack of Weetabix a day, half a loaf of bread. They put curry on top of pizza because that's the only way they can get calories into their body. So what you read about Michael Phelps is definitely relevant to some people, but to others it's not. And that's why I am totally for every athlete having individual in everything that they do, whether it's a training program, whether it's a nutrition, whether it's their S&C. Whereas swimming for a very long time was very much, here's my 20 athletes. All my 20 athletes will follow the exact same training program. They will eat all the same things. They will do the same strength and conditioning program, and they will all come out with successes. No, they won't. It's the one that is best suited to that idea of training that will be successful. The rest will just have to find their way.
Okay, so kind of skipping back a little bit to the Beijing scenario, where you've obviously done really, really well in the heats, etc. And you spoke about the psychological side of kind of psyching yourself out and all that type of stuff. Did you have any support whilst you're out in Beijing in terms of psychologists, or was it kind of something you never expected? You were kind of just...
We didn't have an allocated psych. There were people that were there as sort of support staff that had done a degree in psychology. But at that point, I was young.
Yeah.
And I wasn't requesting that kind of support. And also, Paralympic sport's always been behind Olympic sport. Yeah. So we'd never really experienced that fishbowl, wow, everyone's watching. Yeah. Everyone's expecting us. So I think those mental pressures and struggles are very much driven by external factors. Yeah. And those external factors then impact your controllables, that you feel like, well, I can control what I can eat, but I'm too nervous to eat because I'm worried that everyone's going to expect me to win. Yeah. So I think there was a lot of learning taken from everybody in Beijing, because obviously in London, that was going to go out the window. So I received a huge amount of support post Beijing, because they picked up on the fact that that was the problem. Yeah. And now every athlete's got their own personal person they can speak to and be supported by. I think my problem, and I think this is just the traditional person that I was never very good for asking for help.
Okay.
So it's almost like the problem. So someone really should have intervened when I was overtraining. Yeah. But I purposely protected myself from that. And I'd be like, well, I know that they're going to tell me something that I don't want to hear. So and therefore I'm gonna protect myself from that. I didn't go home because I knew my mum would see me and go, you are not well. Yeah. You need to stop. You know, I'd have muscled phone calls of like, oh no, it's not a cold, mum, I've just got bad signal. Like you protect yourself from the people that you know are going to try and stop you from you doing what you want to do. You're a bit of a crazy addict really when you're an athlete. You have to be. Yeah. And you don't always ask for help. And I totally know that there was enough support out there for me. I just wasn't ready to take it, because I think, you know, I was a smart girl. I was doing sport at uni. You know, I was doing athlete development at uni, and I did a whole dissertation on kind of like the athlete lifestyle and balancing, you know, everything that they've got going on. So I knew exactly what was going on, but I knew that I wasn't willing to kind of allow people in to tell me what I ultimately knew was going to happen, which was, you're not well, you need to stop.
Yeah, it's interesting you're saying about protecting yourself from what you don't want to hear from other people and all that type of stuff. And it's also interesting you saying that it's almost a catch-22 with the media stuff, because when you won your heat, you were like, Claire Ball is speaking to me, this is where I've made it, this is where I belong. But those are also the factors that probably in the final
triggered everything
else in terms of maybe not performing to all your potential and all that.
That's what you'd have to be an elite athlete to feel those pressures now. Yeah. Like, everyone's got social media. There's kids with thousands of followers, and they're expected to maintain this incredible lifestyle that they're putting out there on social media. And so when things don't go right, or when they feel like they're not really, you know, at their best, they don't know how to handle it. And what they created for themselves has actually become a hindrance to them, because they're expected to be this certain way and they can't maintain that. And I think that, you know, what I experience as athlete, I'm quite, I wouldn't say anti-social media now. I don't go hunting for followers. I have despite the work that I do, I know that if I'm more active on social media, I will, you know, have new opportunities come my way. I don't want them. Yeah. I don't want them if I need to have 10,000 followers to get that role. I don't want to be an influencer if I don't believe in how to be an influencer, which is to put on a show, like to create an unrealistic life majority of the time.
So I've got quite into mixed martial arts in terms of watching it, like UFC and all that type of stuff. And there's a guy called Brendan Sharp who started doing social media when he was still a fighter. He's now come out of that as a comedian. I was actually watching one of his podcasts or videos the other day, and he videoed and spoke before a fight, and then spoke and videoed after he'd lost the fight. And it was really interesting for him. He was open and honest. He said, I don't want to document this. No. He said, but I feel like the people that have been with me before should see all of it. You should see the loss as well.
Everything.
Which I think with what you're getting to there is the social influencers a lot of the time, or athletes, will show you all the highs. So they'll show you when they win belts or they win races, but they don't show you when they're injured or ill, in your case, and how horrible it is in terms of, you know, you're lying on a physio bed, like almost in tears because the physio is like, well, I've got to bend this, or I've got to try and straighten out your hamstrings, all that type of stuff. And it just gives people the good side, and they never see the negative sides and how it influences you.
I watched the Andy Murray documentary on Netflix the other day, and it's amazing the other side of the story that the media doesn't tell you about, because it's not sexy, it's not cool, it doesn't make good, interesting reading, which is that he does the same thing over and over and over again. He might be on off periods now because he's recovering from his injury. That doesn't mean he's not training every day, all day, but he's doing really boring stuff. He's not winning matches because he's trying to play with like a metal hip. And they only pick up on the fact that, like, they're trying to find the story that's going to really get the most views on social media. And it's like, just give everyone a break. Like, give everyone a break and let them be what they want to be. And I remember when I was in Beijing, and, you know, everyone was ready to watch that final and see me win a medal, and they didn't. And I remember sitting in a media room, it was, I say media room, in a computer room in the athletes' village, trying to work out the best way to apologise to everybody because I didn't win. And because that was the type, that's what I'd already felt like. I was 18 years old, barely used social media. I think I'd only just got on Facebook. And I felt like I had to apologise to all those people because, you know, I was meant to do what I didn't do. And that's really hard for a young person to have to feel like they're having to be something because other people expect them to be. It's like, just do what you want to do. Like, I get very into this. We could go on and on, because it makes me a bit sad, really, of what the world's going to turn into if children are going the way they're going.
I find it interesting because, like, you look at the England football team, they've allowed more media access at the last World Cup to try and get people on side. But they still have publicists and stuff there.
Oh, yeah, they don't do any of that.
But the reason that they probably have publicists and stuff there is to stop scenarios where you've got an 18-year-old thinking, well, how do I apologise? Well, in actual fact, it's your life or that person's life. Granted, you have fans, etc., but ultimately you have to answer to yourself and no one else, and it shouldn't be down to you to sit there and go, oh, I need to apologise to all these people, because in a week's time they're probably not going to be worried about it, whereas it still would affect you.
Yeah, it's still eating your way. I mean, I actually do a workshop now where there's three people you can be as an athlete if you're going into competition. You either black out and you just go, I'm off social media now, biggest event of my life coming up, I don't want to have any issues with social media whatsoever.
Anthony Joshua recently.
Yeah. You've then got the England football team, someone's creating it for you. So you've got a publicist that's doing everything. You technically are blacked out. You just get nice pictures of you taken in the changing room with your mates, and you know, those lovely like quotes that they've probably taken from you, and you're protected from anything that might come as a result of that. Or you are the full-on selfie, document everything. And I mean everything. You know, your good days, your bad days, your amazing wins and your losses. Because if you're only showing the good stuff, you're not being true to yourself. So that's the three ways I think you can do it and be true to who you are. Because, well, sorry, I say be true to who you are when you've got someone else doing it for you. But you're in control of what's going on.
Yeah.
And anything in between, I think you're vulnerable.
Yeah.
Because you're not fully committed to it. And therefore you are at a risk of reading a comment that caught you at the wrong time, that influences you to do something, you know, poor Elise Christie in the Winter Games, like the ice skating racer, speed skater, and the things she had to read, like death threats from people because she lost, because she knocked over a Korean athlete. My God. Yeah. It's just, so if you can handle that, fine. Social media all day long. If you can't, you black out or you get someone else to do it for you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of
I think it's probably, at the moment, it's reflecting society in itself. It's a little bit angry, a little bit all over the place. No one really knows what the lines are.
Yeah.
You look at the football stadium stuff going on with all
racism issues,
all that type of stuff. Unfortunately, it seems to be a little bit more commonplace. When probably society and culturally we all calm down and hope that the same would happen on that end. Like, it's not right that someone can sit on the end of a keyboard and type things
hurt people for life.
Yeah, you don't realise it affects a person ever, and they'd never say it to them face to face because they're other end of a keyboard. They think it's fine.
Yeah.
Moving across slightly, one thing is really interesting from a football background compared to someone's background is, obviously you work in a team environment in terms of your squad to be able to train, etc. But then ultimately it's an individual sport, unless obviously you've got your relays and that type of stuff, but ultimately it probably comes down to being an individual sport. Whereas in football, you train together for a team outcome.
You win together, you lose together. Yeah.
And so for me, like, if you're training, you obviously want to hold everyone accountable to good standards, because they ultimately affect you and whether we're going to win. How in swimming does that dynamic work in terms of with athletes being in a team but not in a team and that type of stuff?
I think it's very individual. So as I mentioned at the start, I don't think I would have been a swimmer if I was able-bodied, because I'm a very team-driven person. You know, all my school sports was team. It just happened to be that swimming was the one that provided me with the pathway, and I had the athlete mentality to go, right, okay, I'm going to do this. So I've always been a very team person. I need people around me. I'm always going to be like the one that's bringing all the jokes, and I need people with me to enjoy that. Otherwise you're just a sad loser on your own. So I've always been, I think, a slightly different personality to maybe your average swimmer, because it's a bit like those that do individual sports. They're usually classed as being a little bit more intrinsic. You know, they're not after the big showman moment. They're probably quite quiet. They're quite goal driven personally. Whereas me as a swimmer, I needed a team around me. Like, I needed to turn up to training, and, you know, we're in pre-pool and I'm the one doing the jokes. I'm the one making it competitive. I'm the one that's trying to get us all in a really good place. And if someone turns up and they're in a mood, I'm trying to get them to, you know, be with me. And if vice versa, if I'm turning up and I'm struggling, I let people know so they can help me and we can do it together. Because as much as we are winning and losing as individuals, majority of the time we're in a lane with 5, 6, 7 other people that are all doing the same set as you. And if they're doing that set to the best of their abilities, they're encouraging you to do it as well. So I've always had that attitude, and I think that's because I'm a team sport kind of person. There are very many people that will quite happily train on their own, and they'll turn up to training and they'll get in early and they'll do their own thing, because that's how they enjoy their sport and that's how they process what they're doing. And they don't get involved in all the bantery stuff, which is fine. You know, you've got to understand who in your group is going to work with you and who's best working on their own. And I think that's why swimming is quite a unique one, in the fact that it's tough. It's really tough. And there are times when you need to be together in it all as one, but there are times when you need to respect that other people aren't like you. And if they want to train like that, that's fine, because they will win and lose as an individual. Whereas I always felt, and I think maybe that's why I take on that kind of, oh God, if I lose, I'm going to let people down, because I'm kind of always been that. It's like when I play in my other sports, you're in a team. Yeah. You don't want to let your team down. Whether that's the right attitude to have or not, I don't know, because I do find some of the best athletes the most selfish of them all. You have to be. You have to be selfish as an athlete if you want to achieve what you want to achieve, particularly in the individual sports. Okay,
so I've got 2 questions around that. First one, is there a hierarchy in terms of your swimming groups? If you've got, say for example, you've got someone who's won multiple gold medals, would they have more say than someone who's just coming into the program, or someone who's just outside? And then I guess my second question is, as an individual, are you competing against the other people in your group, or are you just competing against your PBs or or where your training is, etc.?
Both really interesting questions. I mean, I've been in a squad which I was the only disabled Paralympian in the squad, and the rest of them were Olympians. And I had to prove my place in that squad. But the way the coach organised the sessions is that, as I always believed was the right way to do it, is that everyone has their individual sessions. So we had like a Barbados sprinter, we had a New Zealand long distance swimmer, we had a Russian open water swimmer, and then there's me, the Paralympian sprinter kind of thing. We were all there as a group, but we all had our individual sessions, which I think probably physically worked best for me, because it was training to me as a person, rather than I have to keep up with this person because they're in the same lane as me, despite the fact they've got 2 hands. However, I struggled with that environment socially, because I didn't really feel like any of them were my mates. It was all survival of the fittest. You do your session, I do my session. We can't really compare. We can't really work together. So that, I mean, now I think about it, that was probably the best type of physical training for me, but the worst kind of mental training for me, because I'd leave the session great. I've just done the best session of my life, but no one was with me to enjoy it. Like, I did it on my own. Whereas then I also trained in like a university squad where there was national swimmers, there was a couple of Olympians, there was those that would just sort of come along as and when, there were those that do bucks, and then I was with a couple of other Paralympians as well. And it was much more group training, which maybe wasn't the best physically for me, because we were all kind of, right, you're off the same time as her, you got to do your best to keep up. But we were in it together. So if I was on a really good day and I was keeping up, I was buzzing. I was like, yes, come on, I'm keeping up with the able-bodied athletes. I'm working at the best of my abilities and everybody else is with me on this. But whether I was actually working in the right energy system physically for me is probably where the question mark lies. So they say there's never the perfect environment.
Are you able to mix the two, or do you have your set groups for a set period of time?
Well, they were different. They were different coaches, and they were different phases of my training. Okay. So I can't really. I haven't tried to blend the two together. I mean, I'm trying to think, probably towards the latter stages of my career when I wasn't well, and I was still trying to train through it. I did have to train on my own quite a bit, just because I had no chance of keeping up with the main squad. So I'm just in the outside lane, plodding up and down with my fins on, and that's all I could do. That was quite demoralising. But for me, it was the only way I felt like I was still there. So it's very individual. It's very coach specific as well, because every coach has their own ideas, and I don't think anyone ever knows what's right for them. Yeah. I think your career as an athlete is never long enough for you to work it out. Right. And if you have had that perfect career, if you've retired on a high, you've managed to reach your peak and it was harmonious, then you're an absolute anomaly. Yeah. Everyone else has to try and fight to find their way through that. And I mean, I think the only thing I miss about my swimming is just the people I got to hang out with. Because you had to be crazy to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and that's what got me through it. Yeah. That is ultimately what got me through it.
So then, in terms of like a hierarchy and stuff,
yeah,
and this might have been from your journalism side. It might have been things you've seen from a journalistic side. I
mean, I don't really ever feel like there was a hierarchy. I mean, you always get your coach's favourites. I mean, apparently I was the coach's favourite, but I don't want to say. But I don't know. Obviously the athletes that have got, competition coming up that week, or the athletes that are training for the games or whatever, they will be the priority, which I think is understandable. Yeah. I don't think it is quite like, when you're in a team, you've always got your coach's favourite and they always start and they're always going to be on for the whole 90 minutes. It's not quite like that in swimming, because everyone has their own goals. So for the benefit of the coach, he needs to think about all of those people, because all of those people have got a purpose, a reason to be there, whether it's they need to go to Bucks University Championships because they're going to help, the university squad. They need to do well at the trials. They want to go to the Paralympic Games. So everyone's got their importance. Otherwise they probably wouldn't be there. So I've never really felt a hierarchy. And if it is, I probably wasn't aware of it because I was at the top. That's terrible, isn't it?
No, it's fine. I say it's just interesting to see if that dynamic carries over, because you look at football at the minute and you do have those influences within the changing room. But it doesn't sound, because of the individual nature, I guess people can kind of go into something which is, I guess, better in a way. So in terms of your work within swimming, the technical detail that you're able to go in with your coaches, obviously you're looking for like tenths of seconds, half seconds at most, maybe thing. How difficult is that over days, weeks, months to maybe see that you might not shave any time off, but they're going, but you need to do this one little detail for it to have a long-term effect. Yeah. Psychologically, how difficult is that? It
is, I think, swimming more than anything, because, we don't have competitions for months. This time of year, we go from December through to March with no real big competition that's any indicator. And if you are racing at the weekend, it's usually a training opportunity. So you're nowhere near your personal best. Yeah. So you're really struggling to find those wins. Yeah. And that's definitely something I learned over the course of my career, because when you're a kid, you're improving every week, just by growing, just by turning up, you're going to do a personal best. And then as it slows up, you need to start working out, okay, what am I working on this week? And I did a lot of different strokes. So I did all the strokes. I went through them all over the course of my career. I don't know if that was because actually it was like, well, that one's improving. So that was my new favorite stroke. I switched it around. So if I knew that, oh my God, I'm doing so much breaststroke work at the moment, this is really hard to take, I would then compete in front crawl at a minor competition just to switch off and to think, well, actually it's good to race, it's good to practice racing environments, but I'm not overthinking the breaststroke because I'm just going to come here and do a splash and dash 50 meters freestyle. Lovely. And actually that's when I usually did a PB. Okay. Because it was the one that I wasn't working on. And that was a bit of a theme throughout my career. The event that I focused all my energy on, I ended up doing better in the other one. So I always had like a flip-flop.
When you're more blasé, seems like what you said about Beijing, you say this now, when you're more blasé about stuff and you can relieve all the pressure, it's kind of like, we'll see what happens. When you
just leave it to your natural ability and you take all that pressure off, that's when you're at your best. And I think it's a hard one to then try and do in real life, because it's like, well, I'm going to pretend I'm working on this one, but I'm actually going to work on this one, and then you're like, oh, I don't really know. So I changed it around a lot. I could never be that person that was just a freestyler or was just a breaststroker. I did a lot of changing. So if you didn't improve in one, you improved in another.
Okay. So one of the amazing things about you, obviously, you mentioned that you didn't qualify for London Olympics, and you said how down, etc. you got about that. It's probably your post-athlete transition, from my perspective, has been really successful in terms of what you've been able to achieve. And obviously you've mentioned how driven and stuff you were. Do you want to talk through exactly what your post-athlete transition looked like and kind of what path it's led you down?
Well, you were involved in it a little bit, to be honest, Michael, in the fact that, so when I first realised I wasn't going to London, it was sort of like April of 2012. So there was still a good few months till London. I'd missed the opportunity. I always wanted to be a teacher, PE teacher, and I'd missed the opportunity to get onto a teaching degree or a teaching course at that point. All the applications had passed. So I was in this sort of hole of, well, I can't go training because I need to take a break. I've got no more studies to do because I've missed the opportunity. I need to do some work. I need to keep busy. So I did some sort of coaching here at the University of Bath through Tribe, and just tried to keep myself busy, because there's nothing worse as an individual who has nothing going on in their lives, because that doesn't look good to your next employer. And it just is not good for you, for someone who's been training every day, all day for the last 10 years of their life, to suddenly have no purpose. So I just invested my time in just saying yes to everything. So I said yes to helping out at clubs. I signed up to a couple of charities and said, look, I quite like talking, is there anything I can do? And I was lucky, and I do know a lot of the things that came my way were an element of luck, in the fact that because London 2012 was massive, every school, every organisation, every business wanted an athlete to come in and promote it, to talk about it. And I was that person because I wasn't going. I was free. Yeah. So I joined up with the Youth Sport Trust, who were looking for athletes to go into schools to just talk about their athlete experience. I'd been to a Paralympics, I could bring some colour to that. It was a strange one for me because I was still in that mindset that I'd failed. Yeah. So then it was strange to then go into a school and be like, hey, look at me, I'm an inspiration, you should be like me. But actually it was a real good healing process for me, because I was forced to tell my story. I was forced to have to explain what had happened. And as a result, kids responded to that, because kids don't always want to see gold medals dangled in front of them, because that's really far off for them. They want to see someone who actually is going through a tough time, or has been through a tough time, like they maybe are as well, and go, well, she's still doing all right. She's still smiling. She's still pushing through. She's now doing this and that. And so that the messaging changed. And it was no longer Kate going to London Games to become a gold medalist. It was Kate didn't make it, but look what she's managed to do. Yeah. And that kind of snowballed. And without realising it, I got contacted by the BBC, who pretty much interviewed me on the phone, just saying, what have you been up to recently then, Kate? And I could just say, I've been going into schools promoting Paralympic sport. I didn't realise that was an interview question to see how I spoke and how I articulated, what I'd been up to. Like, great, can you be in London 2012 for the Paralympic Games? You're going to be one of our expert pundits for the 5 Live commentary team in swimming. Yeah, sure, great. Put the phone down, fell off the chair. I remember my sister being downstairs and being like, what's happened? And I'm like, I'm going to London. I can't believe it. And just thought, wow, as I am best when I just approach something with no real pressure. I went to London and just spoke about what I knew, which is I knew swimming. I knew the athletes. I knew sport, and I knew how amazing Paralympic athletes were. So that's what I spoke about, and had the best 2 weeks of my life. Like, considering it was set to be the worst 2 weeks of my life, watching all my mates compete and do what I wanted to do, you know, I got to challenge myself in different ways. I got to interview some of my closest friends after they'd finished and won a gold, or I got to commentate on some of the best races I'd ever seen and cried on radio. I didn't swear, but I definitely said some weird puns that didn't make sense, as my dad reminded me of. But I was myself, and I don't think it was necessarily the job that I did, but I think it was the job that the Paralympics did that then triggered me to have a career in media, because everyone loved the Paralympics. They really enjoyed watching it. And there was this realisation, and Channel 4 did a brilliant job as well. There was a realisation that broadcasters weren't doing much. And so BBC said, well, do you want to come on board with us, and we'll train you up. We'll train you up to be a journalist, a reporter, and you could become our Paralympic expert. And I was like, yeah, okay. Like, who doesn't want to be a Blue Peach presenter, TV presenter? Like, I didn't really know how to take that. So I just said, absolutely. And alongside that, I continued doing my schoolwork as well, because I'm very realistic in the fact that media, a bit like sport, anything can happen, and you need to have a few options up your sleeve. It's quite a shallow world at times as well. You know, you get a bit lost in the glitz and the glamour, and you're hanging out with all these cool people, but then realize actually it's all a bit fake. And so the stuff I do in schools, it keeps me grounded. It keeps me true to what I enjoy the most, which is working with young people. And as much as it's fab to travel all over the world and interview really cool athletes, I get more of a kick out of sharing my experiences with young people. So I balance the two. And I love doing that. Self-employed, spend half my time working with the BBC, travelling all over the world, covering Paralympic sport events, and then half my time working in schools, working for charities, sort of bettering people's understanding and experience of school sport and inclusion, really. And I've been able to do that for the last 7 years, which is crazy considering it's only meant to be a year transition, become a teacher. But I get the best of both worlds. So I do get to teach, but it's more of a mentoring role, and I do get to still be an athlete in a media role, and get as close as I can to the action without competing. So who knows what's around the corner. I'm pretty much got my name on the list for Tokyo from a broadcasting point of view, which is brilliant. And we'll see what happens after that. I think everything that I've learned over the course of my career as an athlete and beyond is nothing is planned. Nothing goes the way you expect it to. So don't get hung up on what the end goal is as such. Always have an end goal, but be ready to adapt at any point, because that's what I've had to do. My goals have changed over and over again. And I know now that whatever happens, I have got the skills now to adapt to those situations as they come and face the new challenge. Yeah,
I think it's really interesting you talking about the London 2012 stuff, because you openly admit it's like a bittersweet moment where you're like, I wanted to be in there. But I think I've seen some of the footage of you celebrating with your friends and stuff, and that must be nice, because you are people that you would have trained with or been selected with, and you got an opportunity to see them. Yeah. And obviously their successes and stuff in the closest environment, as you said, you could be able to. And then we've seen you out in Rio, in terms of the stuff you did out there. I mean, how was it being out in Brazil and kind of in that Olympics?
I mean, just
warts and all, I guess.
Yeah. The brilliant thing about working with the Paralympic Games is that I guess there's no expectation, but also high expectations depending on where you're sitting. I mean, I always expect great things from the Paralympic Games because I've been involved with it for the last few years, and I always believe it should keep improving. Yeah. I mean, Rio ended up being an absolute party, despite all the issues that it had out there beforehand with funding and doping issues and all sorts. So, I mean, that's never going to go away, is it? Mm-hmm. But yeah, I used it as this, well, if I don't enjoy it, I don't have to do it. So, and that has become my mantra now in what I do, because if you lose the love of something, why are you still doing it? And I'm self-employed. I technically have control over what I do. So I just had the best time out in Brazil. I got some really, really important guests in my eyes on telly, you know, athletes with speech impairments that wouldn't usually get the opportunity to do media. But I was like, well, why not? he's got the best things to say. It might not be super duper clear, but he can say it, you know. And we covered the big stories, the small stories. We met athletes that had won medals, not won medals, and it didn't matter. It was just more, we brought the flavour of Rio, and that's what I care about. I mean, it's never about me being in front of screen. I mean, I would prefer just to be behind the camera, but asking the questions. I like being a part of it. I don't want to be in front of it. And I will continue to work hard to get athletes that I feel are role models and should be in the public eye, because that is who the children should be looking up to. Those are the best people out there. And that's the role I take. Originally I was like, oh yeah, you know, I'd love to be presenting questions of sport and things like that. But you have such a small contact time with the real people. Like when you are that presenter, you sit there and everything's happening around you, and you just hold it together. Whereas as a reporter, as a reporter, you are there in the thick of it. You're there with the personalities, the highs and the lows. And that's what I live for. That's what I thrive in. And, you know, whether it's a good story or a bad story, you've got to make sure that's a story that people are hearing about. So
do you think you're like grounded as an athlete and possibly knowing some of the athletes or knowing someone who knows that athlete helped you to get those types of interviews?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to do the whole, oh, well, I was an athlete once, because it feels like you're just trying to, you know, win them over. But as soon as you do say that, they get it, particularly from a Paralympian point of view, mainly because, you know, my experience in media when I was an athlete was like, so who are you? Can you just tell us who you are, please? Because people, they didn't know, and they didn't invest time in researching them. Whereas I sit down with an athlete, they're a bit nervous, they're a bit like, who's this idiot? And I'm like, oh, do you know what? I remember when I was competing, you know, what it felt like. And they're like, oh, right, okay. So I don't use it to try and get stories that are, you know, stories for the sake of getting stories. I do it to make the athlete feel comfortable and willing to share whatever they want to share at that point in time. And it's nice because I am now seen as a reporter. I'm not just seen as Kate, the former Paralympian, but I still seem to be able to relax them and make them feel okay, because I think the best way to get the most out of people is to just create an environment where they feel totally safe. And, you know, especially with big stories that are happening, whether it's around doping, whether it's around bullying, whether it's around, you know, all the dramas that are going on in sport, there's no point going in there like a bulldozer. They're just going to close off to you. You need to be winning. And also, whether it will do my career any justice or not, I will not force an athlete to talk about something they don't want to talk about. I am not going to hound anybody to share something to get a good headline. They will share it with you when they're ready. And I stay by that.
But I think the saying about not one's going to go, I used to be an athlete, I think the important bit you said there is that they understand that you get it. And they understand actually she's been through this, or
she's got some empathy.
She's got some empathy, so they know you're not going to do that, because they know that you've probably tried to be quizzed and stuff. And you're like, I'm not going to talk to you about that. I'm not
trying to catch you out.
Yeah, so that's probably why you do get access to those people, because you're good at it, but also you have empathy with them, which I think is really important. Obviously, you mentioned about being a journalist, TV host as well. How was that process?
Well, it's not something I was really expecting to go down as well. It's just, I think once you can learn to chat, you can chat, whether it's in front of hundreds of thousands of people, a couple of people, or a camera. Like it's just part of what you do. And they all sort of blur into one now, the experiences. People go, don't you get nervous? And I'm like, well, what, how's that going to help? Like, I know when something's more important than other things, but, I just enjoy chatting to people. And if that means that there's lots of people watching or no one watching, and, you know, now I'm doing a podcast as well, it seems to be the new fun thing to do. I just really enjoy opportunities to get news to people that want to listen and share stories of people that want to share it. And if you can be the facilitator of that, which ultimately that's all I am these days, I facilitate people to share what they want to share. I'll happily take that. It's a strange world that we end up in, isn't it? Nothing ever goes to plan, but who knows what happens when you just have the confidence and the open-mindedness to take on a new challenge.
Okay, so I've got 2 questions left for you. The first one is, what is an Olympic village actually like? Because you hear loads of stories and you hear people grinning. I
mean, a lot of the stories are true, so I'm not going to lie. I mean, as I described earlier, it's massive. It's just like a village of elite athletes that are just having the best time because they're at the best sporting event in the world. And there's lots of banter. The Australians are always pulling pranks and stealing mascots, and they're always the ones that are trying to push the limits. And then you've got like the African nations that are always at the party animals, but in like a musical sense rather than going out all night. But they're just the ones that bring the energy. And then it's just, especially in a Paralympic village, because when I went to Beijing, I hadn't been massively exposed to the rest of the world, and more importantly, the rest of the world and its disabilities. And I remember walking in and watching a guy eating his breakfast with his feet. Standard. Okay. That's where you do it. Like, because there's some nations that have very different disabilities to what we have. Now, we have a lot of cerebral palsy or limb deficiencies. We don't have masses of amputees, whereas, there's places that have been in war. They've had limbs blown off, and that's what they're used to dealing with. And a lot of the time, children that were born with spina bifida or cerebral palsy wouldn't have survived. So it's interesting how you see the different nations have got different types of disabilities, and therefore they're the ones that have progressed forward. It's so much better now. The variety of disabilities across all nations is very much becoming sort of a standard now, rather than they're like this and they're like that because of, their experiences and backgrounds. But I remember just seeing a guy eating his breakfast with his feet, and I was like, this is going to be an interesting one, isn't it? And then obviously there's usually a McDonald's hamburger marathon at the end of it, whereas we all sit down and see who can eat the most. I had a dodgy tummy on that day. And yes, they do hand out Olympic and Paralympic condoms at the end of the competitions. I'm not sure if that was appropriate for this type of podcast, but there is a lot of fun had at the end of the games, and they have to be prepared for them.
Does it get more and more rowdy as it gets on? Because I know, listen to Ricky Gervais when he says about hosting the Golden Globes and stuff. He says as the night goes on, they get more rowdy because some people get more drunk because they've won, others get more drunk because they've lost.
They've lost, yeah.
And I imagine that must be similar in Olympic Village. If people are staying there, as more and more people have had their events, it must be like, right, I'm just going to let my hair down.
Well, the swimmers are always blamed because the swimming is always first and the athletics is always last. So the swimmers are all there ready to party, and there's no rule saying you can't go out after you finish competing, but you're not really allowed to run through the village, at all hours screaming and shouting, which we don't do, by the way. But there's an etiquette to follow. But, bad luck if you've been there all week or for 2 weeks and your event is on the last day, because, it's everyone else around you is having the best time. But it definitely, the energy grows, but in a different way, because the energy is either, oh, I'm so bad, like I'm gonna drown my sorrows, or oh, I'm amazing, I've won a medal, and there's a lot of emotions going on in one place.
And are families and stuff allowed in, or is it strictly?
No, strict. Okay. Strict. So there might be a holding area where you can meet them, but most countries have like a hotel, which they call the sort of the British house, where athletes can go and meet their family for the day or for half a day or whatever. But it's solely only athlete and team people in there.
Okay. That's good. And then the last question from me, and I'll ask everyone this, is who's the best person that you've competed against or trained with, and why?
Oh, that's a really good question. Best person I've trained with or competed with. I think most of my training time has been spent here at the University of Bath. And the brilliant thing about being in a university setup is that there's always like a flow of athletes coming through. I mean, someone that I've always been massively in awe of and motivated by is my friend, but also my teammate, Liz Johnson, because she went through a crazy time around the Beijing Paralympics. So she lost her mum 6 days before she won gold at the Beijing Paralympics. She was on the team with us and we were close friends, and just blew my mind that she was able to do that, and just a true, reflection of her character and spirit to be able to do that. She then decided to come and train here at the University of Bath post those games because she needed a fresh start, and just watching the way she sort of handled what was a really tough time in her life, but also still training and being the best athlete in the world, was just a real lesson to me. Plus she's a lot more physically disabled than I am. So she's cerebral palsy, so half her body doesn't work properly. And so she is constantly adapting what she's doing in training to fit in with us, but still, improve as an athlete as well. And yeah, it's just amazing to watch someone who is the best in the world, but doesn't rest on their laurels and just goes, right, well, what do I have to do next? How am I going to make myself better? And knows themselves and are very sure of themselves. And I always wanted to have her confidence. I always wanted to have her belief, because I think I'm a very confident person. But when it came to my swimming, I was a little bit, I doubted myself at times. And I think that's probably because when you've had losses, whereas the confidence that comes with winning is very admirable. So she was a brilliant mentor to me as well. Like, she was great at just having it around, and sometimes we never spoke about swimming. And then sometimes that's all we spoke about. So we kind of knew our limits. And she's now a huge advocate for Paralympic sport, for disability as well. Like, she's got an amazing company that she set up around getting more disabled people into business. So she's definitely the person that I've kind of watched and followed and learnt from. And she helped me understand how to public speak and share my stories, but still be true to yourself. And she's just a really good mate as well.
Good mate, always good to have good
mates. It's helpful when the person you look up to is a good mate. I just don't tell her that. So I hope she doesn't listen to this podcast. It'll go to her head.
I'll edit this back. No, listen, I appreciate you giving up quite a lot of time to speak to me, and hopefully hear you over in Tokyo next year. And thanks.
No, thank you for having me on. Oh, as you can tell, I love to chat.
Sweet to you too. Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.